slave marriages in states like Virginia were broken up by sale. Religion was also an important part of life in slavery. While masters wanted their slaves to learn the parts of the Bible that talked about being happy in bondage, slave worship tended to focus on the stories of Exodus, where Moses brought the slaves out of bondage, or biblical heroes who overcame great odds like Daniel and David. And although most slaves were forbidden to learn to read and write, many did anyway, and some became preachers. Slave preachers were often very charismatic leaders, and they roused the suspicion of slave owners, and not without reason. Two of the most important slave uprisings in the South were led by preachers. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? We're doing 2 set pieces in a row? All right. The rules here are simple. I wanted to reshoot that, but Stan said no. I guess the author of the mystery document. If I am wrong, I get shocked with the shock pen. Since I have been in the Queen's dominions, I have been well contented. Yes, well contented for sure. Man is as God intended he should be. That is, all are born free and equal. This is a wholesome law, not like the Southern laws, which puts man made in the image of God on level with brutes. Oh, what will become of the people, and where will they stand in the day of judgment? Would that the 5th verse of the 3rd chapter of Malachi were written as with a bar of iron and the point of a diamond upon every oppressor's heart, that they might repent of this evil and let the oppressed go free. All right, it's definitely a preacher, because only preachers have read Malachi. Probably African American, probably not someone from the South. I'm going to guess that it is Richard Allen, the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Ah, dang it! It's Joseph Taper, and Stan just pointed out to me that I should have known it was Joseph Taper because it starts out, since I have been in the Queen's dominions. He was in Canada. He escaped slavery to Canada, the Queen's dominions. All right, Canadians, I blame you for this, although thank you for abolishing slavery decades before we did. Ah! So the mystery document shows one of the primary ways that slaves resisted their oppression, by running away. Although some slaves, like Joseph Taper, escaped slavery for good by running away to northern free states or even to Canada, where they wouldn't have to worry about fugitive slave laws, even more slaves ran away temporarily, hiding out in the woods or the swamps and eventually returning. No one knows exactly how many slaves escaped to freedom, but the best estimate is that 1,000 or so a year made the journey northward. Most fugitive slaves were young men, but the most famous runaway has been hanging out behind me all day long: Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman escaped to Philadelphia at the age of 29, and over the course of her life, she made about 20 trips back to Maryland to help friends and relatives make the journey north on the Underground Railroad. But a more dramatic form of resistance to slavery was actual armed rebellion, which was attempted. Now, individuals sometimes took matters into their own hands and beat or even killed their white overseers or masters, like Bob, the guy who received the arbitrary beating, responded to it by killing his overseer with a hoe. But that said, large-scale slave uprisings were relatively rare. The 4 most famous ones all took place in a 35-year period at the beginning of the 19th century. Gabriel's Rebellion in 1800, which we talked about before, was discovered before he was able to carry out his plot. Then in 1811, a group of slaves upriver from New Orleans seized cane knives and guns and marched on the city before militia stopped them. And in 1822, Denmark Vesey, a former slave who had purchased his freedom, may have organized a plot to destroy Charleston, South Carolina. I say may have because the evidence against him is disputed and comes from a trial that was not fair. But regardless, the end result of that trial is that he was executed, as were 34 slaves. But the most successful slave rebellion, at least in the sense that they actually killed some people, was Nat Turner's in August 1831. Turner was a preacher, and with a group of about 80 slaves, he marched from farm to farm in Southampton County, Virginia, killing the inhabitants, most of whom were women and children because the men were attending a religious revival meeting in North Carolina. Turner and 17 other rebels were captured and executed, but not before they struck terror into the hearts of whites all across the American South. Virginia's response was to make slavery worse, passing even harsher laws that forbade slaves from preaching and prohibited teaching them to read. Other slave states followed Virginia's lead, and by the 1830s, slavery had grown, if anything, more harsh. So this shows that large-scale armed resistance was, Django Unchained aside, not just suicidal, but also a threat to loved ones and really to all slaves. But it is hugely important to emphasize that slaves did resist their oppression. Sometimes this meant taking up arms, but usually it meant more subtle forms of resistance, like intentional work slowdowns or sabotaging equipment or pretending not to understand instructions. And most importantly, in the face of systematic legal and cultural degradation, they reaffirmed their humanity through family and through faith. Why is this so important? Because too often in America, we still talk about slaves as if they failed to rise up, when in fact, rising up would not have made life better better for them or for their families. The truth is, sometimes carving out an identity as a human being in a social order that is constantly seeking to dehumanize you is the most powerful form of resistance. Refusing to become the chattel that their masters believed them to be is what made slavery untenable and the Civil War inevitable. So make no mistake, slaves fought back, and in the end, they won. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Mower. The script supervisor is Meredith Danko. Our associate producer is Danica Johnson. The show is written by my high school history teacher, Raoul Meyer, and myself, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe. Every week there's a new caption to the Libertage, but today's episode was so sad that we couldn't fit a Libertage in until now. Suggest Libertage captions in comments, where you can also ask questions about today's video that will be answered by our team of historians. Thanks for watching Crash Course, and as we say in my hometown, don't forget to be abolitionist.